is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The developments both in and outside of China require us to be better prepared to face more complicated and challenging situations. The world's economic growth remains sluggish. The trends of de-globalization and trade protectionism are on the rise. There are many uncertainties about major economies' policy directions and their spillover effects, and the factors that could cause instability and uncertainty are visibly increasing. China is at a crucial and challenging stage in its own development endeavors, and there are many salient challenges in the economy. The difficulties we face are not to be underestimated, but we must remain confident that they will be overcome.
The trends of de-globalization and protectionism are on the rise, but we must remain confident that the difficulties will be overcome. Well, those were the words of Chinese Premier Li Keqiang as he delivered the government's work report at the opening of the annual two-sessions meeting in Beijing. Now, as more than 3,000 Chinese delegates converge in the Great Hall of the People, what new strategies are they proposing to chart the way forward for China in the new global environment? And how will these strategies shape China-Africa relations among the changing global trends? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, as a wave of protectionism sweeps across many parts of the world, the relationship between China and Africa continues to bloom. Barely 2 years since the historic FOCAC meeting in Johannesburg, South Africa, China is once again reaffirming its commitment in working with Africa towards a win-win cooperation for all. CGTN's Robert Nagila is in Beijing and now brings us this development.
The two-sessions press briefing by Foreign Minister Wang Yi is an annual highlight in China's foreign policy. The minister gave a quick audit on China's development commitments to Africa, pledged in 2015 during the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit. Then, China pledged grants and development support totaling $60 billion over a 3-year period. Wang says China is well on its way to fulfilling those pledges.
It's been over 1 year since the Johannesburg summit, and more than half of the support that was pledged has already been implemented. Several major projects, like the Addis-Djibouti rail project, have been completed, and the Nairobi-Mombasa SGR rail project is now almost complete.
China is already Africa's largest development partner and says it is ready to do much more, but work on current projects must be carried out faster. Wang says cooperation is now moving into a new phase which will add momentum to Africa's development.
Cooperation between Africa and China is changing in 3 different ways. First, from government-guided to market-oriented development. Second, from goods and trade to production capacity cooperation. Third, from project outsourcing to investment. I think these changes can provide Africa with more opportunities for sustainable development.
China has developed strong economic and cultural ties with Africa. It has also been instrumental in humanitarian programs and peace and security matters. With its latest commitment, Sino-Africa relations appear stronger than ever. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Beijing, China.
And now to offer further analysis into the ongoing two-sessions meeting and its implications on China-Africa relations, I have expert guests standing by in Beijing, Professor Ho Wenping. She's a senior researcher at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And with me in studio here in Nairobi is consultant economist David Awiro. Thank you both for joining in this discussion. Professor Ho, let me start off with you though, and to get a clearer understanding for our audience here about the two sessions ongoing in Beijing. Explain to us the two sessions and why it matters, particularly for Africa.
Well, every March in Beijing, there will be this very important political event. That is, we call the two sessions. In Chinese Mandarin speaking, it's called Liang Hui. So these two sessions, one is called the NPC meeting, that is the National People's Congress. equivalent to like lower house. So if we refer to those British political system, so meantime we will have another one. It's called the CPPCC. That is Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. So maybe equivalent to like an upper house, but of course it's different. The function or even the mechanism setting, the principle is different. So in our case, the NPC, those delegates, they are congressperson, so they are coming from different provinces, so representing their own different walks of life. So they will discuss the national those budget issue, the working report given by the Prime Minister to discuss the future economic development plan, the national development plan, and the CPPCC. Those people they are offering their report, their proposal in terms of different area they are coming from. So they offer the consultative role to Africa, because this issue all discussed during the two sessions, they're very fundamental. For example, what kind of economic growth rate in this coming 2017, so what kind of development goal we are going to reach, and even in terms of military budget, how many percentage we are going to increase those budget for military building. So everything, science and development cooperation approach with other countries. So that's why it also matters with our relations, economic cooperation with Africa. For example, lots of correspondents, especially those foreigners, those correspondents, some are from African countries. They are very concerned about this slowdown of China's economic growth rate, because this time, 2017, our economic growth rate, GDP growth rate, is just set to like 6.5% GDP growth rate. This is the lowest speed comparing with the past 30 years. Even last year, we are still reached to 6.7. So if China's economic growth rate now is slowing down, which means those demanding for those raw material will be also getting less. So maybe that will influence the economic growth for Africa. Maybe that will influence China's this development cooperation plan with Africa.
Right, David, of course, you're watching the two sessions ongoing in China here, and Professor Ho Ping has talked about the impact of a slowdown in China's economy on global economies, and particularly Africa. What's your take?
Well, there are two things that are likely to happen because of the economic slowdown. So one could be a reduced scope in terms of the development cooperation that China is able to do. But at this point, the revised projections are small, not too significant. And so I don't expect, to my mind, a huge impact on the size of the development cooperation that China makes out to Africa. But on the other hand, the issue about consumables or goods that China traditionally trades with Africa, economic slowdown just basically means that there's less output for this year as compared to last year. And therefore, Africa being a major consumer of Chinese products, in that respect, there will be more pressure in terms of where they source, and that could translate into issues of inflation and higher prices.
But China has announced, though, that its relationship with Africa, or its partnership, is changing in about 3 ways here. And the government has said that it will be a more market-oriented, a more investment-driven relationship here. How do you see this impacting Africa?
I think this is something that is not sudden. The Chinese have been saying this from before, that their model of development is one of mutual appreciation, mutual respect, in the sense that you see yourselves as two partners of equal measure, and so extending the hand of perhaps suboptimal or sub-market pricing, the days were numbered, and this is something that has been coming. What perhaps we would like to see is what exactly do they mean by this market-based development cooperation that they envisage, and how then directly would it affect Africa's, particularly the development side of Africa that China has been investing a lot in. And so we are keen to hear the kind of pronouncements that they're going to make.
Professor Ho Wenping, what strategies of deglobalization, what strategies is China proposing at this point, though, to deal with that deglobalization trend?
Well, I think China is the biggest contributor for this globalization. And we are also I think it's the biggest beneficiary from this globalization. So, China's GDP growth rate, even though it becoming the lowest point in our history, but it still belong to the first, I think, it's frontier in terms of the GDP growth rate comparing with other developed countries. So it's still high. So we have contributed at least more than 1/3 of this global economic growth. So in that way, we would like to continue to push for the free trade, the globalization, and do whatever we can to lead this globalization to more inclusive way. Because the reason for this globalization of facing some kind of against the forces like de-globalization, those kind of resentment is because it caused us quite a lot of gap between those have and the haven't, and between countries and even within a country. So that's why not only we are doing the things at home, even internationally, we are also wants to lead the way. For example, last year, the G20 meeting in Hangzhou, and also, for example, this Davos meeting earlier this year, President Xi has made it very clear to the global society, saying China is still a very strong backbone for insisting on and push to this globalization. One Belt, One Road actually is one of the initiatives trying to continue this path of globalization. We are going to share China's not only our resources, our financial means, and also the development experiences to all the countries would like to join this One Belt, One Road.
Yeah, right, Professor Ho Wenping there. And we are going to take a short break here on the program, but when we come back, we'll look further into Sino-Africa relations in the dawn of protectionism. To stay with us.
Africa is not one story.
With protectionism and unilateralism on the rise, the Belt and Road Initiative is a common cause where all countries roll up their sleeves and pitch in together. The initiative will help to rebalance economic globalization and make it more inclusive and equitable. It also represents the important attempt at building a community of shared future for all humankind.
Well, that was Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi speaking of the One Belt, One Road initiative and its aim to create more equitable and inclusive growth for all. We continue our discussions now, and I still have my expert guest standing by. In Beijing, Professor Ho Wenping, she's a senior researcher at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And joining us now from Johannesburg is Michael Tsudikasa. He's the CEO of the Africa Business Group. And David Awiro is still here with me, economic consultant with me here in Nairobi. Mr. Tsudikasa, thank you for joining us in this discussion. And I'll come with you because as we were going to the break, we were discussing protectionism and de-globalization and its impact on Africa. China is holding its 2 sessions at the moment. Where do you see Africa fitting in this de-globalization trend?
Well, I think then Africa has challenges, definitely, because if you look at what's happening in the West, the de-globalization also is translating into potential declines in terms of aid. And although we've made a lot of strides on the continent over the last decade, we're not yet out of the woods. In terms, though, of the impact that all of this will have on Africa and China relations, I think it stands to actually expand the relationship that you have between China and many countries on the continent, but particularly the East African and Southern African countries. Because in terms of competition, if you will, as the US looks inward, as the UK looks inward, as Europe grapples with what this means for them, China and to some degree India will be two countries that are still having their doors open for trade with the continent, are still looking to invest in the continent, and that will forebode for expanded relations between this continent and those countries.
Right. David, you do see the relationship between China and Africa now expanding, though, despite that deglobalization and protectionism from Western countries.
Yeah, so I entirely agree with what Michael has just stated in his remarks, in the sense that, you know, for a long time, the world has been convinced that, you know, open trade policies lead to better outcomes, better economic outcomes. And even as the rest of the world looks inward, you know, these are per se traditional partners, trading partners of Africa. China now can step into that role in terms of being able to, you know, with their posturing in terms of, hey, let's, for us, we're still for, and we still believe in, you know, open trade policies, and you know, they have a long-term commitment to support Africa's development agenda. I think that's a great opportunity for Africa.
One area, though, David, that Africa has been included in the globalization trend is the One Road, One Belt initiative by China launched there. How do you see this impacting Africa? What will be the economic opportunities for Africa here?
Well, something that has been happening is that, you know, as the Chinese economy has been developing, for a long time, China had been the destination for lower income jobs. These are high quality manufacturing that are stationed out of China. And so as incomes are rising in China, these jobs have to find a way somewhere. And so Africa could position themselves to be the recipient of these jobs, given that, you know, this is the only place where, you know, wages, you know, income levels are still, you know, quite relatively low. And so the issue is just how to, you know, have capital investment so that the productivity can match, you know, that of, you know, global productivity. And so there's indeed some hope in the sense that if African governments take advantage of this and have or put in place the policy framework to allow for these jobs that were traditionally would have gone to China and India, for them to, you know, find a home in Africa.
Right. Michael Sudakasa, what do you see as the economic opportunities that will be created by the One Belt, One Road initiative?
Well, I definitely think that agricultural transformation, and you see it in countries around the continent increasingly, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, you see the impact, if you will, even in places like Kenya, of Chinese investment in the country, but definitely value addition, the opportunity, as my colleague mentioned, to have a repositioning of global manufacturing away from China but into countries in Africa where we have a youth bulge, we have strong economic structures being put in place increasingly on the continent, and we have a recollection or recognition, if you will, on the continent that we are positioned in a very positive way also for intra-African trade. So we're a large market. We're increasingly, with our growing middle class, able to buy our own products. And so we're a destination for investors that manufacture, both from our own consumption and also for re-export. So we think that there's definitely a strong opportunity on the continent to benefit from this. But you have to, I guess, put a spin on it. I mentioned before that much of our development is still hinged to some degree on development assistance. And there's no guarantee in this new environment that we will continue to have that. So we will also need to have domestic resource mobilization.
Right.
And I'll end with that.
Right. Professor Ho Wen-ping, though, and I do want to bring you here because Michael has talked about where African economies are at the moment. But on that whole level of transfer of labor-intensive industries as part of growing Africa, how is China exactly going to pursue that?
Yes, I fully agree with my African colleagues' opinion. Now this is a time, I think we call it repositioning of manufacture, or we call it this is restructure of this the value chain. So it is happening now because during the past 3 decades, China has made itself becoming a world factory. So everything called made in China now has been sold globally, not only in Africa and also in the US market, the EU market, but now with this extra productivity capacity, now it's the time to move, to shift this world factory, this position now all the way to Africa. So Africa has quite a lot of the advantages and potentials to grasp this opportunity. So made in Africa. Now that means makes Africa catch up and also upgraded itself from only a supplier of raw material, now becoming a manufacturer by itself. So things made in Africa, I think those commodities will becoming more and more. That's one of those dividends coming from this we call One Belt, One Road, or we call it like infrastructure together with those industrial zones building. So that will be the chance and opportunities for Africa.
Bringing that production capacity, though, to Africa, because that is where Africa has been waiting to reap from. Your take?
Yeah, so this is actually going to be very interesting for Africa, because for a long time, Chinese policy has been that, government will lead the way, lay the framework, and then after the framework has been laid, the market has been secured by government, then its entrepreneurs will come in and sort of compete and sort of, raise their level of competitiveness so that they can now sort of play with the big boys. And so the signal that we are getting, if it is indeed that, is that government now is withdrawing, so that now those entrepreneurs who previously were within that framework of somewhat protection and leadership by government, for them to survive and thrive by themselves. And so for African governments, it will be now upon them to look at how, because that will significantly affect their operations. In the past, they would sort of have a very willing helping hand from the Chinese government saying, hey, this is something that we can provide, this is something that a service or an investment that we can do. But now it has to make sense. Whatever projects, whatever infrastructure projects, for instance, that governments are thinking about, they have to have, the key value for money, aspects and instances that would make any other player to see some high rate of return as per the global norms and those kind of things.
Well, we are seeing a lot of Chinese investment or that push for Chinese investment into Africa, though, against a backdrop of what is happening in the rest of the world, de-globalization and protectionism, though. What impact do you see that having, though, if at all Chinese investment was to enhance its presence on the continent?
I think it's a defining moment for the world, because on the one hand, you have got this high protectionist political rhetoric that has been, center stage in the last 2-3 years. And here you have China, a big player in the world, who is saying, actually, for us, we are seeing and advocating for more open trade. And so this is quite interesting and I think it's to the advantage of developing nations, because it's only through open borders and open trade that you can be able to achieve the kind of development that Africa aspires to.
Professor Ho Wen-ping, so what exactly does this mean, though, that China's partnership with Africa will be changing from a more government to a more market-driven relationship here?
Yes, my understanding is this is gradually changing. Because before we heard lots of encouragement policy, preferential policy, either goes with the financial arrangement or goes with those driven by the government, lots of policy. It seems the government now push push those entrepreneurship to go to Africa. This is the major characteristics during the past 10 years also. But ever since I think maybe it's a gradual change process. Maybe we cannot say which year, which event these things has been changing, but it's in the process of changing. Nowadays, government just inks with those MOU, like with relevant other countries' governments, including Africa, and even with those Belt Road, those countries around with the Belt Road Initiative. So government just leading the way, gave the policy, gave the framework of this MOU, and then those entrepreneurship, those business person, they have their own enthusiasm to do the things with their own. For example, we have in these two sessions discussion, Premier Li Keqiang have delivered his annual working report, is saying in this 2017 we are continue to cut those extra, those productivity capacity. So for those companies, for those enterprises themselves, they need to cut this because otherwise they cannot survive by themselves in China. So
Right.
they need to transfer those extra capacity, productivity, so they have their own enthusiasm to do this. So that is saying now it's the market driven. No longer government now doing the things, now the business person, they're doing the things with their own driving forces.
Right. Michael, I do want to get a final comment from you there, because as the world settles in that protectionism trend, what do you see as Africa's expectations in all this? Because you're a great believer in intra-Africa trade.
Well, I think that Africa will be contrarian, if you will, in terms of closing borders. All the pushes from the African Union, from NEPAD, from the African Development Bank, are all focused on opening borders and creating a true market of over 1 billion people. I think that the rhetoric, if you will, and the actions that are happening outside of Africa toward closing borders, frankly, will be short term. And I think, as my colleague mentioned, those economies, to me, maybe even if in the short term there are some benefits, long term, I think that they will realize that that was not the wisest move to close borders in an increasingly globally interconnected world that we live in. One cannot go backwards in that regard. So I think that as Africa continues to become one integrated continent, the market will be attractive for investors. The returns will bear this out. I think those countries around the continent and those regions that engage with Africa in a free trade manner, an inclusive and development focused manner, will benefit as well.
Right.
So I think that, you know, unfortunately, there are a lot of issues that are forcing or moving countries towards protectionism, but I don't think that in the long term those are the best strategies that they should pursue.
Michael, we leave it there for the moment, and that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to my guests for their insights. In Beijing, Professor Ho Wenping, Senior Researcher at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In Johannesburg, Michael Tudekasa, CEO of the Africa Business Group. And with me in studio is consultant economist David Owira. Thank you for joining in this discussion. And remember, you can join this conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And to join us again next week for more Talk Africa. Goodbye.